Evaluating different projects. You know, in finance, probably one of the more interesting, sometimes complex, maybe even confusing things is evaluating different projects. And boy, can they differ. They can differ by size, length, risk, and even type. Well, the first thing we're going to do, and this may be coming as a bit of a surprise and maybe counterintuitive, and that is let's look at the net present value of a loan against its self-same discount rate. Now, to be fair, sometimes projects are financed with common stock or a weighted average cost of capital, but more often than not, on the margin, the loan finances the project, and the two kind of go hand in hand. Let's look at an example. Here we have a pretty simple loan. We're going to borrow $100 at 10%, tax rate of 40%, and we're going to do it across 6 years. We'll make this an interest-only loan. It's a little simpler to handle. What's the net present value? First thing we're going to do is recognize that the discount rate after tax is 6% because we get to save 4 of every $10 of interest because it's tax deductible. Well, in period 0, we have $100 coming into us. In time periods 1 through 6, we have an outflow of the interest payment of $10, 10% of that 100, but 40% of that, or $4, is tax deductible, so we have a net outflow of $6 each of those 1 through 6 periods. Then, in period 6, we pay back that principal. Well, let's take the present value of those. That $6 periods 1 through 6 is an annuity, figure the present value, and in period 6, the principal, the $100 we pay back is a single sum. We calculate the net present value, and looky there, the net present value is 0. Let's do another example. Here we got a $800,000 loan at 5% for 8 years, a 20% tax rate. So the after tax, well, that would be 4%. And let's see, time period 0, receive the 800. Time periods 1 through 8, we pay $40. Remember, got that tax savings. And in period 8, we pay back the principal of 800. Looky there, net present value is 0. Well, the upshot of this is, in many cases, if we're financing with a loan, we can omit it from the process, or if we include it, it should be a net wash of 0. Let's do one that's relevant in many cases, especially for some of us when maybe considering buying or leasing a car. We're going to look at lease versus purchase. Let's say the tax rate is 1/3, and you can borrow monies at 9%. So after tax, that would be 6%. You're faced with a choice between a lease costing $90,000 per year for 5 years, beginning of the period, don't you know, and a purchase costing $400,000, having a salvage value of $100,000 in the 5th year. And to make things a little simple here, we'll use straight line depreciation, meaning $60,000 each of those 5 years. And the business, regardless of whether it's a lease or a purchase, generates $200,000 and has costs of $80,000. Well, for the lease, because we're paying at the beginning, you know, they do that up front, we're going to have the lease payment after tax. That 90 now becomes $60,000 because it's a 1/3 tax bracket. And we're going to move that annuity table up 1 period and adding the number 1 for period 0. Or another way is just increase it by that 6%. In either case, the factor is 4.465. And we get a present value outflow of some negative $250,000. For the purchase, we have that $400,000 going out at time 0, same present value. Time periods 1 through 5, into the period, we get a tax savings of that depreciation. That's, watch it, just 1/3. And we take the end of the period annuity table, 4.212, and let's add in the salvage value in year 5. No tax consequences of a single sum. And, well, let's see, 84.74 offset by the 400. Again, roughly $250,000. And the assiduous amongst you will notice that the lease is slightly more expensive in present value terms That is normal, and we will later see why. And either one of these, the purchase or a lease, can be used to open the business, which generates $200, has costs of $80. Well, after tax, that's $120,000. Remember, it's after tax, so we take 2/3 of that. Present value, that is some third of $1,000,000. Well, the NPV, the net present value of the lease, is slightly lower than that of the purchase, and that's no surprise. And the nominally correct answer would be go for the larger net present value. They're mutually exclusive, can't do both. We would go with the purchase. But wait, don't call now, there's more. The purchase, you're married to it. You're stuck with it. You have the risk of obsolescence, style changes. They might go from one fabric to another. Business risk, it could go up and even interest rate risk. We'll talk about that. So maybe to avoid those risks, you're willing to tolerate a greater cost and a lower profit by going with a safer lease, because you can walk away from it. With a purchase, you're married to it, so to speak, but with a lease, you can avoid the obsolescence, style changes, business risk. Let's look at that interest rate risk. Here's a graph of the lease and the purchase. Notice the purchase is steeper. Why? Because it's composed of nothing but positive cash flows, whereas the lease has a negative payment offsetting the positive income. Oh, by the way, we have the loan in there, and each one of these cross the horizontal axis where the net present value is 0, and it turns out we call that the internal rate of return, which is another tool we can use and is fraught with problems. But that's later. A very different kind of project selection process occurs when you have to choose among multiple projects. Maybe you can do multiples of them, or maybe they're mutually exclusive. You have to choose one. Let's look at an example. You can have a tax rate of 40%, and you can borrow at 10%. I guess that means our after-tax cost of capital is 6%. We have 3 projects. One costs $10,000, lasts 6 years, produces revenues of $8, costs of $1,000. Project B costs $17,500, again 6 years. Revenues are $12,000, has costs of $4. And we have Project C, which costs $12,500, again 6 years. Revenues of $8,000 and costs $2 per each of those 6 years. By the way, notice I made all of these 6 years to make this one simpler. We'll look at that also. Well, here are the 3 all laid out. You know the process: present value, cash flows, etc. Net present value for A costs 10, produces 4. B costs 17, produces 6. C costs 12, produces 5. Let's see, which would you choose if you had $45,000, or what if you had $40,000? Or maybe you had to choose each one uniquely, separately. Well, there are a lot of tools, many of them having different relative merits. One of them is the profitability index. We'll take the net present value divided by the initial outlay. That could be problematic if the initial outlay is across time, like license, permits, digging. And, well, here we got A is 0.47, B 0.34, and C 0.41. Hey, it looks like A's great, C is better, but B comes in last. Now here arises the packing problem. How are you going to fit that stuff in there? If you had $45,000, you would do 2 A's and 2 C's, because it uses up all the money. If you only had $40,000, you would do 4 A's. That's not a surprise. What if each one was unique, meaning you'd only do one? Well, you'd choose each one of them. And finally, if you only had to choose one of them all, you'd choose B because it adds the greatest amount of cash. Boy, talk about complex, but wait, there's more. What if the cash flows kept changing signs? You bought the property, and then you did some pre-sales, and then you built some more. Well, in any case, if you have multiple signs, you get multiple internal rates of return. And that can be dealt with the advanced modified internal rate of return, where you just compute all the values to a terminal amount using some passive rate of return. But wait, don't call now. There's more. In the examples we've done so far, we all had the same life. Maybe a diesel truck lasts longer than a gasoline truck, and you're going to replicate them. Well, one way is to repeat until they both wind up having the same length of analysis. Boy, keeping you up to date with Dr. C Invests.